It's a pleasure to be here, and my apologies for not having been here for the rest of the day. I'm afraid I'm a bit of the walking wounded today. Apart from still recovering from a cataract operation last week, which means that half of my sight no longer works properly in relation to my glasses. I'm also recovering from a significant fall on the weekend, which resulted in part in a broken large toe. And today I have one of those 24-hour lurgies, so don't come too close. However, I'm here. I'm pleased to say that my colleague Rosa from South Australia has been here most of the day, but she's very wisely left before I started speaking. Oh, you're still here. Sorry, you were down here.
I've been waiting.
So Rosetta has been here, and can I just say that the coders take the issues that you're discussing today very seriously. For those who don't know, as was mentioned briefly, CODA is the peak age consumer organisation. It's a federation of coders in every state and territory. CODA Australia is the national body. We have over 1,100 organisational members that reach out to about 500,000 older Australians and 30-odd thousand individual members. CODA's been at the forefront, in particular, of aged care reform in recent years, both in its own right and as a lead sponsor in the National Aged Care Alliance. It's at the forefront of the current debates around pensions and superannuation retirement incomes. Our brief covers the waterfront, really, those two areas, obviously, ageing population issues, the intergenerational report that just came out, we've been heavily involved in. Unusual areas, perhaps, you might not expect, like energy policy and consumer law. We sit on the ACCC's Consumer Advisory Panel. Financial services and financial advice, we sit on ASIC's Consumer Advisory Panel, and have spent quite a few days recently talking with Treasury officers about the financial system inquiry. Housing, transport, aged care, and of course health. It's a very wide brief, and there are not many of us, but we seem to make an impact. Now, ageing is changing, or perhaps I should say, firstly, the subject that I was given, which isn't up there, is very, very complex and wide-ranging in terms of the range of things you've got today. So what I want to do is talk for a little while, and then I actually want to generate some conversation, some questions, some comments, some assertions or challenges to what I've said. Ageing is changing, but that change is very much in transition. And I'm sorry I didn't hear your earlier speakers today about that. We're still back and forth between different paradigms of what it means to be old and older in our society. The old paradigm is being challenged heavily, but it's alive and well. That paradigm says that life has a best by date, not a use by date, but a best by date. And after you're off over that magical best by date, then you're over the hill, on the slippery slope. It's time you were putting your feet up. You should be smelling roses, as long as you're not allergic to them. There's a whole lot of those phrases that say that there is a point after which, basically, it's a slippery dip. And I see that in all sorts of ways. You see it obviously in the areas of discrimination and mature employment issues, where older people just find it really, really difficult to get back into a workforce if they become unemployed. I was interested in a program that's running on the ABC at the moment about the economic challenges of recent years, that Ken Henry said that following the Keating recession, 50% of the people aged over 45 who were unemployed never worked again. I think we're better than that now, but it's still a major issue. But I also see it, for example, in professional colleagues who are getting into their 60s and telling me about the number of people who ask them whether they're still working full time. Isn't it time you slowed down? Put your feet up. Things like that. One needs to kind of ask why. The new paradigm is quite different. The new paradigm says that life is a constantly escalating curve. It's about continuous growth and development. that everybody can be a growing and contributing and productive person, and certainly until very, very late in life, or until medical events might intervene, and that can actually happen at various times. And that tension plays out in many spheres of life, and in this arena manifests itself in a number of ways. For example, one of our constant battles is around trying to get increased health promotion and illness prevention programs and activities directed to older people. It's very hard to do that. The policy people involved will talk to us about whole-of-life programs. What they mean is you start young and you catch people young and you'll change their behaviours, and then when they get older they'll be well behaved in relation to X or Y, some of which may not happen, of course, until you're already halfway through your life. But they don't seem to think that it matters or it's important that you aim programs at older people, that if this thing is worth doing, that you can have an intervention, notwithstanding that the evidence is that interventions are important at any stage of life and have positive effects. And indeed, in some of the challenges of later stages of life, every stage of life has challenges, you would be wasting your time and energy in directing efforts to younger people. But that is a really serious issue, and it is about, behind it lies that image that actually why would you bother, because they're already on the slippery slope. It's still common too in the medical world to hear doctors say, well, if you were 20 years younger, I would do X or Y, but since you're not, we'll just do this. I had recently had that recounted to me by the 72-year-old principal of a very elite school in Sydney, who still is the principal and had broken her shoulder, and the doctor was telling her that, you know, if she was, 52 and leading an active life, not just being a principal of a major school, then he would do certain things, but he wasn't going to bother, he was just going to patch up. So she really took him to town, including pursuing him in medical ethics areas. But of course a large number of people don't do that when the doctor says, if you were 20 years younger. And indeed, in many cases, I would assert it's still the case that the doctor doesn't say it, they just think it and they act in that way, and the patient never gets to have that argument. On the other hand, many older people talk to us about not being able to have any say in what they regard as over-medication and over-treatment in later life. Several years ago, when we were pushing heavily for the aged care reforms, we took Minister Mark Butler, in whose federal electorate I think we must be very close to, if not in, Minister Mark Butler around the country for a series of conversations on ageing. This was exposing him for 2 hours to people to talk about the Productivity Commission's report on reforming aged care. And we had correctly scripted everything that those people were going to bring up, with one exception. And that exception was in every case, well, certainly for the first third of them, it was a bit of a surprise. We then knew it was going to happen. In every one of those, people themselves brought up, older people brought up end-of-life issues. And I don't mean euthanasia, there was a bit of that. It was about not having control of the medical and health processes in later life. And that is a really serious issue. At the same time as the fact that we have a lot of evidence that we continue to have very poor palliative and end-of-life care for many older Australians. On the lighter side, I might say that I do get interesting questions from the media, for example, about how come there are so many older people on cannabis these days. It's a bit like how come there are so many older shoplifters these days, and how many old people who are still having sex, apparently, too. It doesn't seem to have occurred to the media that there are lots more older people, and therefore if they've been cannabis users all their life, they're going to be older people with cannabis users, and if they're shoplifters, they're shoplifters. But there are a lot of very, very serious issues here. One of the issues with alcohol abuse, which is a much more significant issue amongst older people than we've been prepared to recognise, probably because we think it probably doesn't matter if they drink themselves into oblivion, because that's probably quite good for the pension. what is it about? A lot of it is about lack of role, lack of contribution, social isolation. Social isolation is in my view, as big an issue as many other chronic illnesses. And yet we don't really approach, I don't think, alcohol abuse amongst older people in that kind of context. On the flip side, we hear quite a bit about the refusal of alcohol in residential aged care. Because what happens in residential aged care is large numbers of people get treated as infants. And you know, one of the things about residential aged care, it's actually one of the loneliest places to be for many, many people. So it's no wonder that some people might want to drink there. Pain management in residential aged care is a really significant issue. A lot of evidence, I think, that pain management is very poor in residential aged care. My close colleague Stephen Judd, who's the Chief Executive of Hammond Care in New South Wales, is a dementia specialist. Lots of people with adverse behaviour, poor behaviour with dementia, get referred to Hammond Care from other aged care providers who can't handle them. In something like 3/4 of the cases, they work out quite quickly that the person is actually in pain. And why they are behaving badly is because they're in a lot of pain and nobody's doing anything about it, and they've got dementia, but the dementia is what's blamed. Which brings me to another drug issue in residential care. The very widespread use of psychotropic drugs, of chemical restraint in aged care for people with dementia, is, in my view, a crime. We've moved away from physical restraint, but large numbers of people are restrained long-term by chemical means, and that is going to become a significant rights issue for us going into the future. Also, in the area of medication management, polypharmacy, older people themselves are sometimes part of that issue. And one hears some really ingenious stories sometimes about people who doctor shop so that they can make sure they've got sufficient amount of all the things they think they need. But also one hears regularly still about the people who actually don't really understand what it is that these pills they've got are supposed to be for, and how they may or may not interact with others, and how, and when they've been to one health professional, they don't actually get screened about what they were already taking. And of course, hospital visits and coming back out again is a significant risk area in that respect. And we've been talking about that for as long as I've been in this game, and yet it's still happening out there. A key question in all of this is the degree to which in our health system the older person is regarded as an object, as something that you do something to and then send them away, versus the older person as an active player or agent in their own health, which I'm sure everybody in this room thinks is the case. But we might talk about how we do things about people outside the room who don't realise that. In aged care reform, there are two very fundamental things happening, and I want to acknowledge my colleague Jill Lewin from Western Australia, who is very much part of this, and that is the adopting of what the jargon calls a wellness and re-ablement approach, not a term I find particularly palatable, but it's become very popular. A wellness and re-ablement approach, which essentially says that when someone comes in contact with the aged care and support system, that instead of just plugging them into services, which increasingly are then get added to, you actually work out how it is that you can enable that person to resume as much of their active and contributing life as is possible. Not always possible, but in a great number of cases is. So a wellness and re-ablement approach rather than plugging them into care. And secondly, consumer-directed care, which is where we're at the moment in terms of home care in the aged care system, which means that the provider is required to actually work with the person as to what they want, what kind of services they want, delivered by whom, when, and how they want it. That is just beginning to be in a major way rolled out after being piloted for some time. It is really only a halfway step to where we're going next. Where we're going next in aged care is to actually put the resources, the packages, and one hopes in due course the bed licences, in the hands of the service user. So that we don't pay the provider and let the consumer try and find it. We pay the consumer and they go to the provider who's going to offer them the best. That will considerably change over, probably it will take a decade, the culture of aged care in this country. And it's interesting to me, from what I understand it, that we are now in the UK, they are now starting to experiment with packages of consumer-directed care in the health system. So those are the kind of things that, in my view, I could have talked to you a lot about a Charter of Rights. You know, you go into hospitals and they have them sticking on walls sometimes. They have them in nursing homes too. But I think what we're dealing with here is actually a cultural approach to older people and ageing, to what their role is in our society, and to how our relationship is with them, that affects the quality of how we're going to be able to interact, and whether they are an object or whether they're an agent, and whether you are doing things to them or whether we are enabling them to have more control over their lives where necessary with medical and other assistance, which might include pharmaceutical assistance. I'd like to stop it there and invite people to disagree, agree, elaborate, or just